Welcome to the deep dive. You hand us the essential, often dense reading material, the biographies, the deep dive research papers, the financial reports, and we carve out the shocking details and the necessary knowledge you need.
And today, well, we have one of the most intellectually compelling stacks we've seen in a while, I think.
Definitely.
It spans centuries, continents, linking, 19th century monopolists to 21st century tech giants and some pretty shadowy global operators. The sheer amount of wealth and power described in these sources is just staggering.
That's right. And the individual stories are incredible people like Sam Walton, Steve Jobs, even Victor Bout. But the real power here, I think, is in the patterns.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to analyze these, disparate sources and distill that universal playbook, the one used by people who don't just get rich, but who really, truly control global systems.
Exactly. We're specifically hunting for, let's say, three critical recurring themes. First, this absolute obsession with end-to-end control.
Total control.
Yeah. Second, the strategic, sometimes really brutal use of speed and scale to just crush the competition.
Okay.
And third, the prevalence of deep secrecy and, financial opacity. It seems to shield these empires from anyone looking too closely.
So we want to see how these core strategies stay weirdly consistent, whether you're building a railroad or an operating system.
Precisely. It's about finding that common thread.
We're basically setting the table here for understanding the blueprint for global domination. So let's jump right into the economics of scale and speed, starting with a master of American retail, Sam Walton.
Okay, so when we look at how you build like an unbreakable competitive advantage, Walmart's early strategy, especially under Sam Walton, it's really the textbook definition of leveraging cost control for scale. Walton's mantra was simple but relentless: control expenses.
It sounds obvious, right? Control expenses. But the sources really emphasize this wasn't just, corporate cost-cutting memos. It was baked in from the start, a deep operational philosophy.
Exactly. I mean, when he first bought that variety store in Newport, Arkansas, he wasn't just the owner. He was the laborer.
Right.
Washing windows, sweeping floors, stocking shelves. He did everything himself to keep personnel costs, operational expenses down to the absolute minimum. And that mindset that every single dollar counts, even when you're tiny, that became the engine later that allowed Walmart to just systematically undercut everyone on price.
Yeah.
They just had lower expenses built into their DNA.
And he combined that thriftiness with what the sources call a saturation strategy, which honestly is one of the most brilliant uses of geographic scale I've ever come across.
Oh, it's pure genius. It's making your scale work for you in multiple ways at once. Instead of opening like one store in a new market and seeing how it goes,
They just blink at the area.
aggressively,
Yeah.
they plant multiple stores really close together. The classic example given is that region around Springfield, Missouri. Get this, 40 stores within a 100-mile radius.
40 stores, so they basically became their own competition. But that sounds incredibly expensive up front, doesn't it? Why was that saturation tactic so key to their economic edge?
Well, it did three things almost immediately. First, it cemented market dominance super fast. Nobody else could get a foothold.
Yeah.
Second, and this is where the cost control comes back in, it totally revolutionized their logistics. They could use their regional distribution centers, often built right in the middle of that same 100-mile radius with maximum efficiency. It drastically cut transport time and cost.
Oh, makes sense.
And third, maybe the most cunning part, it virtually wiped out their advertising spend.
They were just everywhere. The stores where they advertised.
Precisely. The source points out, when you move that aggressively from town to town, especially in rural areas, word of mouth is incredibly powerful.
Right.
Why spend a fortune on expensive regional TV or newspaper ads when the biggest news in the next county over is, hey, they're opening a Walmart? They saved a fortune just by strategically making themselves unavoidable. And yet, even when they became this colossal, $50 billion chain, Walton kept insisting they needed to perpetually think small.
That's the paradox you mentioned, right? That tension between huge scale and the individual customer interaction.
He really believed that if the corporate leadership, the guys in Bentonville, ever forgot they were fundamentally just small-town merchants, focusing on that simple, basic customer interaction, the company would just crumble. They had to keep that small-town touch, the smile, the greeting, asking, how can I help? Even while operating on this massive global scale.
So that philosophy, massive scale, relentless cost control, but also that tiny customer focus. That's the blueprint for retail domination.
Pretty much, at least according to Walton.
Okay, so if Watson dominated through saturation and cost, Ray Kroc at McDonald's really proved that speed and reacting to customer data in real time could be just as powerful. He totally transformed the food industry with that insight.
Yeah, Kroc didn't invent the hamburger, obviously, but he perfected the system around it. He was obsessed with quality control, QSCV quality, service, cleanliness, and value. But the real genius was the radical speed and adaptability built into that operating system.
Right.
His system let them succeed not through like long-range forecasting, but through almost instantaneous reaction.
And that Filet-O-Fish story you mentioned, it perfectly shows that system's flexibility, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It shows how necessity, basically desperation, forces innovation within a machine that's already running smoothly. You had Louis Grand, a franchisee in Cincinnati. He was just getting killed every Friday, losing tons of business. Why? Because Cincinnati had this huge Catholic population, right? And people weren't eating meat on Fridays during Lent.
Okay.
So they were all going to his competitor, Big Boy, which already had a fish sandwich.
Yeah.
Grand goes to Kroc, who apparently initially hated the idea of fish in his stores, smelly, messy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But the loss of market share was undeniable. The source actually calls the product born of desperation.
So the system didn't predict the need for fish, the market screamed for it, and the system just pivoted instantly.
And crucially, they didn't just slap any old fish sandwich on the menu. Kroc's system, built on that rigorous testing, quality standardization, controlling the suppliers, it was fast enough to incorporate and perfect this new frozen fish product. It let Grand compete immediately and grab that Friday market share back.
So they learned directly from customer buying habits and adapted instantly with a product that was standardized, quality controlled across the whole chain.
Exactly. That speed lets you dominate these little niche segments that your slower competitors, they just can't react quickly enough to touch.
So we've talked about 20th century operational speed, Walton and Kroc, but let's fast forward now. That focus on speed, on efficiency, it's being dramatically accelerated by technology, specifically AI. Our sources are suggesting the pace of this new economic shift is, well, unprecedented, happening within maybe just one generation.
And that speed, that's the critical difference, isn't it? Between the transition we're going through now and previous huge shifts, like, say, the move from farming to factories.
Right. The Industrial Revolution took generations.
Exactly. This transition is expected to be way more compressed. And it's because it's driven by three catalysts that just didn't exist back then.
Okay, and for our audience, what are those three modern accelerators, the things making this shift happen so incredibly fast?
Right. So we're talking about, first, the sheer ubiquity of cheap, massive data. That's the fuel for all these AI models.
God, data.
Second, the exponential drop in the cost of compute power. Think cloud infrastructure, specialized chips like GPUs. It's just way cheaper to process all that data now.
Okay, compute power.
And third, the algorithmic breakthroughs, especially in the last, say, decade. Things like deep learning, which have actually made AI capable of performing cognitive tasks pretty effectively.
And all three are hitting at the same time.
Converging simultaneously.
Yeah.
That's the key.
And that convergence has just dramatically changed the whole equation for automation, hasn't it? Where the impact is felt first.
Absolutely. The prioritization is shifting in ways people might not expect. We often talk about AI replacing factory workers, right? Robots on the assembly line.
Yeah.
But the source makes this really crucial distinction. It is far easier to build AI algorithms than to build intelligent robots. Meaning automating the physical world, getting a robot to successfully walk around a chaotic factory floor, pick up oddly shaped objects, do really nuanced manual stuff that's still incredibly complex and expensive.
Whereas writing an algorithm to, say, process invoices automatically or detect tiny defects in a product from a video feed, that's relatively simple to deploy now.
Precisely. So that means the simplest, most routine factory jobs, things like basic assembly, maybe quality control checks using smart cameras, those will be automated relatively quickly.
Okay.
But the rest of the complex manual labor tasks, that's going to be far slower to replace. And this has really significant geographic implications.
You mean like the high density of complex manual labor in economies like China's might see a slower transition?
Potentially, yeah. Slower relative to the immediate job disruption we're already seeing in, say, the American economy, where AI algorithms are much easier to implement right now in highly digitized office work, service jobs, that kind of thing.
So the white-collar sector in heavily digitized economies, is kind of the path of least resistance for automation right now.
Seems like it. The efficiency of AI algorithms in processing data, writing code, doing analysis, that's where the immediate gains are. And that speed of deployment is why this transition feels so incredibly fast and disruptive compared to those older economic shifts.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit from speed to, well, absolute power. The next undeniable piece of this blueprint seems to be control. This relentless drive among major innovators to own the entire value chain, from the initial idea right down to the final delivery to the customer.
And this is where we meet the ultimate integrationist, right? Steve Jobs.
Had to be.
His whole strategy at Apple, it was defined by this tight, almost suffocating integration. He merged the hardware, the software, the content into one seamless package, which, yes, gave the consumer this near-perfect experience often.
But fundamentally locked everyone else out.
Exactly. It was designed to exclude. He completely rejected the idea of an open standard, which was really becoming the norm elsewhere in the industry. The sources actually say he was congenitally averse, like allergic to licensing the Macintosh operating system.
It wasn't just a business decision then. It felt almost like a moral conviction for him.
It really reads that way. It was Jobs's, uncompromising artistic temperament clashing head-on with industry reality.
Yeah.
We see these internal proposals mentioned, like one arguing they should license the Mac OS to Tandy, of all people.
Tandy, wow.
Yeah. And the marketing director apparently pointed out, quite reasonably, that an industry standard is almost never created and maintained by just one company alone. It needs an ecosystem.
And Jobs just said no.
Flat out rejected it. Fundamentally because he believed that giving any control to outsiders would dilute the user experience. It would let in friction, ugliness, imperfection.
Okay, so he prioritized perfection over market share. But here's the critical question, isn't it? If Jobs' closed system was so perfectly engineered for the customer, why did Bill Gates' more flexible, more pragmatic approach with Windows end up winning the vast majority of the global market? Was that perfection actually a flaw in the long run?
Well, that's the central tension, I think, at the heart of the whole personal computer revolution. Gates understood something crucial. Ubiquity often trumps perfection in the race for domination.
Get everywhere first.
Right. He was pragmatic, calculating. He licensed Microsoft's operating system, MS-DOS, and then Windows and its software, to a huge range of manufacturers.
Yeah.
Dell, Compaq, HP, countless others.
Creating that ecosystem, Jobs resisted.
Exactly. And that allowed Windows to become the universal industry standard, while Apple remained this brilliant, beautiful, but ultimately much smaller, walled garden. Gates basically accepted the messiness, the imperfection that came with lots of different hardware setups.
To achieve total market dominance through flexibility and ubiquity.
Yeah, it worked.
So the lesson seems to be, maybe, that while tight control creates the best product experience, sharing, or at least licensing, creates the biggest market experience, at least, in the short to medium term.
In Gates's control, it wasn't just about the product itself. He cultivated this very specific culture of, let's call it, controlled confrontation inside Microsoft. It was intentionally intense, highly demanding.
Yeah, we've all heard the stories, right? Him supposedly calling employees stupid or an idiot in
Yes.
meetings. Was that just bad management, or was it actually a strategic tool for keeping that edge, that dominance?
The sources suggest it was a deliberate management strategy, designed to ensure the company's mental toughness, as they put it. Gates demanded argument. He wanted his employees, his engineers, his managers to defend their ideas with absolute clarity, absolute conviction.
A trial by fire.
Exactly. The process sounds like it was brutal, yeah. But the idea was it ensured only the most robust, well-defended ideas survived that internal pressure cooker. But crucially, the sources also note Gates was not dogmatic. He would change his mind if someone presented a truly convincing, logical argument.
So it wasn't just about obeying the boss. It was about intellectual survival of the fittest.
Right. Control via intellectual combat, you could say.
Yeah.
But when it came to market share, his focus was pure, unvarnished dominance. No ambiguity there.
He wasn't subtle about it.
Not at all. The drive for total victory was almost existential for Microsoft back then. Early on in the PC strategy, he apparently didn't mince words. He flat out declared to one project manager, we're going to put digital research out of business.
Wow. Digital research being the competitor with the CPM operating system back then.
Exactly. And that quote just perfectly illustrates that for Gates, competition was never about finding a way to coexist. It was a zero-sum game. It was about crushing the rival to achieve systemic, lasting control over the entire market.
This drive for systemic control, though, it isn't just a Silicon Valley thing, is it? Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, he mastered this kind of control back in the 19th century, not always through owning everything outright, but through really strategic alliances.
Absolutely. Carnegie realized that controlling steel production itself was vital, obviously. But controlling the distribution of that steel was equally critical.
The railroads.
The railroads. But instead of trying to buy up every mile of railroad track in America, which would have been impossible and ruinously expensive, he sought the closest alliance with PRR, the Pennsylvania Railroad,
Why the Pennsylvania Railroad specifically? What made them so special?
because he recognized their strategic value was just immense.
Hmm.
He apparently believed they were worth all the other RRs to us put together.
Really?
Yeah. The PRR gave him unparalleled access to raw materials like coal and iron ore, and crucially, to the massive hungry markets of the East Coast. So his policy was basically keep to our own business, which was making steel but work absolutely loyally with the railroad's president, ensure smooth freight traffic, get preferential rates.
So that's control through strategic leverage, through alliance,
Yeah.
securing the whole supply chain without having to actually own every single piece of infrastructure himself.
Exactly. Very clever. It's about controlling the choke points. Okay, so the final piece of this global power playbook, and maybe the most essential in some ways, is secrecy. When you're operating at this kind of scale, operational privacy, it stops being just a convenience, right? It becomes an essential operational weapon, a shield against competitors, against regulators, sometimes even against, well, the truth.
And we absolutely have to start with the extreme example here, Theranos, where the operation's secrecy became almost pathological. But it had to be, didn't it? It was necessary to hide the fact that the core technology just didn't work as advertised.
Right. The culture of secrecy at Theranos reached these extraordinary, almost paranoid levels. You had employees being actively forbidden from listing Theranos on their LinkedIn profiles.
Seriously, what did they put instead?
They were told to use vague descriptions like private biotechnology company employee or something similar. It was a very clear attempt to just hide what they were working on, prevent any kind of industry knowledge exchange or comparison.
They were trying to create a complete information vacuum around themselves. What other kinds of extremes did this control culture lead to?
Well, the control extended to really basic stuff like communication and even physical movement. Emails were monitored, browser histories were checked. It fostered this atmosphere of pervasive distrust.
Uh-huh.
And get this, workers at their Newark, California office were actively discouraged from using the on-site gym,
The gym. Why?
specifically to avoid them mingling, just chatting, with employees from other companies that were leasing space in the same building. They went to, frankly, ridiculous lengths to prevent even the most casual information leakage. They were desperately trying to protect the fakery, as the source calls it, the lie at the heart of their whole operation.
So that secrecy, driven by the need to hide a fundamental, massive corporate failure. Now, contrast that kind of functional, albeit deceptive, business secrecy with the much more personal pathology we see in someone like Howard Hughes.
Hughes. Yeah, he's an example of secrecy sort of metastasizing into total mental isolation, isn't he? His extreme isolation in Bungalow 4 at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Yeah.
That was really the final stage of a severe mental breakdown. It was characterized by total disregard for personal hygiene, and he just ceased virtually all contact with the outside world.
But even then, the source mentions this odd form of therapy he had.
Right. His only consistent, if really bizarre form of therapy, was communicating purely in technical chatter about aircraft engines with one specific Lockheed executive over the phone.
So even in that terrible decline, his mind found this strange refuge in the tiny details of control, of technical data, maintaining a kind of functional connection to the engineering world he used to dominate, even while completely rejecting human contact.
It really highlights how, for some of these figures, maybe control and technical mastery become the only reliable framework left when their personal stability just completely collapses.
Okay, moving from operational secrecy, let's dig into how the global elite weaponize financial complexity and political access. This is laid out really clearly in the analysis of the Asian Godfathers.
Right. In Southeast Asia, the structure of power often relies on what the source calls the conglomerate web. These tycoons, they don't just operate one or two big flagship companies you might have heard of.
No.
No, they weave this incredibly complex web. Numerous listed public companies, they're just the visible tip of the iceberg alongside literally hundreds of unlisted private companies. And this structure creates extreme opacity. It's almost impossible to see through.
And how does that complexity, that opacity, serve the purpose of control and secrecy? What's the advantage?
Well, by using all those unlisted private companies, they can shuffle assets around constantly, they can hide debt, they can mask the true extent of their holdings, and crucially, their political influence. It makes it almost impossible for outside regulators or even competitors to trace accountability or figure out who really owns what.
It's like a shell game on a massive scale.
Exactly. One multi-billionaire quoted in the source material estimated that they set up, on average, 15 companies in a month, just constantly forming and dissolving entities to maintain this protective fog around their core assets and activities.
15 a month. And this financial opacity, it's deeply linked to political access, isn't it? Facilitated through Guangxi. We should probably explain clearly how that mechanism works in practice.
Yeah, Guangxi basically means leveraging deep-seated personal connections networks. In Southeast Asia, partly due to the colonial legacy and how power structures formed, tycoons maintain their influence by actively cultivating political leaders, their families, key officials. And this involves more than just, friendship. It involves offering lavish gifts, luxury trips, and, very importantly, well-paid directorships on company boards.
Okay, can you give us a concrete example of how that plays out?
Sure. The sources detail how, in Malaysia, for instance, it was apparently common practice to reward prominent families from the ruling UMNO party, or even members of royal households, with these kinds of financial positions or board seats.
So, essentially ensuring political protection and regulatory favor.
Pretty much. And another example, the empire of Lin Goton, which was centered on casinos, a heavily regulated industry, obviously. His companies demonstrated this very explicitly by appointing retired high-ranking officers from the National Police Force to their boards.
Ah, sending a clear signal.
Exactly. It signaled to the government, to potential rivals, that the company had close ties to the security apparatus, ensuring its valuable licenses remained secure and any challenges were likely to be rebuffed. It's a systematic integration of political power right into the corporate structure.
That is just breathtaking. Now, a similar kind of end-to-end integration model, but focused entirely on brutal efficiency and low cost, was perfected by Victor Bout, the infamous arms dealer.
Yeah, Bout's operation was kind of unique because it functioned exactly like a fully integrated Fortune 500 company, just, for illegal arms. He didn't just broker deals between buyers and sellers.
No.
He did everything. He sourced the weapons, often from old Soviet stockpiles. He organized the transport himself because he owned his own fleet of aging cargo planes. And he often financed the deals himself, too. This complete end-to-end control allowed him to bypass all the usual middlemen.
And drastically undercut rivals on price.
Exactly. That was his edge.
And what were the direct operational results of that vertical integration? How cheap could he be?
Well, he was capable of charging these incredible cut-rate prices. Like, the source mentions just $60,000 for a transport run into Baghdad during a very dangerous period.
$60,000.
Yeah, which was apparently far below the $100,000 or more typically charged by, say, UN humanitarian agencies operating similar flights in the same risky regions.
Wow.
And this aggressive low-cost model achieved because he owned his planes outright, spent absolute minimum on maintenance, paid his crews very low wages. It allowed him to just undercut his way into business, sometimes, ironically, even securing transport contracts financed unwittingly by U.S. taxpayers, simply because he was the cheapest, most efficient carrier available, regardless of what he was carrying on other flights.
So his operational control made him functionally unbeatable in that specific shadowy market.
For a long time, yes.
Okay, finally, let's look at the strategic use of immense wealth to influence policy and public perception, especially in democratic systems. The modern conservative movement, according to these sources, has really perfected the use of anonymous money to achieve this.
Yes. They utilize what the source memorably calls dark money ATMs. Organizations like Donors Trust and its affiliate, Donors Capital Fund. These entities act as a very sophisticated screen, a pass-through.
How does that work exactly? How do they screen the money?
Well, wealthy donors or conservative foundations contribute large sums to these funds to Donors Trust, for example. Then Donors Trust redistributes that money to various conservative and libertarian political action groups, think tanks, advocacy campaigns, and so on.
So the mechanism completely obscures the original source of the funding.
Precisely. These funds deliberately screen the contributors, making their financial fingerprints effectively disappear from public view. The money flows through the trust, allowing these wealthy individuals and foundations to bankroll sometimes very controversial campaigns. The source specifically mentions the extensive climate change counter-movement without the public or the press being able to easily trace who is actually paying for the effort. Right. Opacity becomes the political weapon.
This strategic use of information control, or maybe information denial, it definitely has historical precedents, particularly among powerful media moguls. William Randolph Hearst clearly understood how to leverage his newspaper empire for political gain.
Oh, absolutely. Hearst famously refused to play by the established rules of political partisanship. When he ran for office himself, he very shrewdly positioned himself as the champion of the common man, declaring that elections were a conflict between the trusts and the people.
Using his own papers to amplify that message, presumably.
Constantly, he leveraged his massive media platform to control the narrative completely, ensuring maximum publicity for his campaigns and his chosen candidates.
And he also recognized the power of integrating his media business with completely new ventures, too, didn't he?
Yes, that was very smart. When he formed Cosmopolitan Productions, his film studio, in partnership with the movie mogul Adolf Zukor, he immediately gave his new studio an enormous advantage over competitors. Because he could guarantee blanket publicity, positive reviews, star profiles, everything through his vast magazine empire, which included hugely popular titles like Cosmopolitan and Hearst's. He controlled the means of film production and the means of public perception, all at the same time. Vertical integration, again, in a way.
And going back even further, maybe the original master of this kind of public perception management during business fights was the railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt.
The Commodore. Yeah, Vanderbilt was notorious for his ruthless, cutthroat business dealings. But during one particularly nasty railway dispute, his testimony to the press apparently produced a decided change in public sentiment in his favor. He somehow managed to successfully frame his quite monopolistic actions not as self-serving greed, but as actually being beneficial to the common good.
How on earth did he manage that persuasive flip? That sounds difficult.
Well, he famously argued, quite simply, that he always served the public to the best of his ability. Why? Because, as he bluntly put it, it is to my interest to do so.
Huh. That's refreshingly honest in a way.
It is. By arguing that his private interest, which was maximizing efficiency, cutting costs, and making huge profits, aligned perfectly with the public's interest in getting cheaper, faster transport, he successfully deflected criticism and basically ensured his massive capital investments and his monopolistic power were protected by public opinion, or at least public acceptance. It was a brilliant, if entirely self-serving, alignment of public and private interests. #HackOutro. So, if we try to synthesize the strategies across all these different titans, from Sam Walton's engineered cheapness to Steve Jobs' integrated perfection, right up to the kind of secrecy webs spun by those Asian godfathers, the common currency, the thing that really underpins enduring power, seems to be this absolute commitment to end-to-end control.
Right.
Backed up by the ability to execute strategy with just blistering speed, and then protected, shielded by layers of operational and financial secrecy.
It really feels like the pursuit of just being clever. The model, someone like George Soros maybe initially celebrated with Jim Rogers, that quickly gives way to the cold, hard logic of controlling the entire system, doesn't it? The source material strongly suggests success isn't just about being smarter than everyone else.
No, it's about establishing the structural mechanisms, the systems, the alliances, the opaque finances that guarantee your capital reproduces itself almost automatically.
That's the crucial takeaway, isn't it? The most powerful entrepreneurs, the ones who build lasting empires, they consistently prioritize total system control, and they just refuse to be constrained by conventional limitations. Think about Gates challenging his own managers to maintain that mental toughness, or Ray Kroc systematizing the entire hamburger supply chain just to capture niche market segments instantly. That refusal to compromise control seems to be the non-negotiable step towards building that kind of explosive wealth.
Which brings us, I think, to the really profound implications for wealth distribution that we sort of touched on earlier. What does this incredible centralization of control and the capital that comes with it ultimately mean for the wider economy, for society?
Yeah, what's the end game?
Well, it potentially leads to that cycle described by economists like Thomas Piketty, right? The idea that the successful entrepreneur always tends to turn into a rentier. Once an individual, or maybe an entity, crosses a certain massive threshold of capital accumulation, their focus often shifts, maybe subtly at first, from disruptive innovation, from building things, towards simply managing the assets they already have. Asset management becomes the core business.
And the growth of that pile of capital is then dictated by that fundamental economic inequality Piketty highlighted. The idea that RG, the rate of return on capital, R, is consistently, historically, greater than the overall rate of economic growth.
which means the compounding effect just takes over. Basically, the wealthier you already are, the faster your wealth grows, and it becomes increasingly divorced from actual productive labor or ongoing innovation.
It allows wealth to concentrate exponentially, almost effortlessly, it seems, at the very top.
That's the theory, and there's a lot of data to back it up. So this raises a really critical question, I think, for you, the listener, to mull over. Given all the evidence we've analyzed today, this relentless drive for control, speed, secrecy, does explosive growth and market domination, no matter what sector you're in, does it inevitably lead to this transformation? From the hungry, disruptive innovator to the passive, yet immensely powerful, wealth-concentrating asset manager.
And maybe even more importantly, what does it mean for the rest of us, for society, when the source of that enduring compounding power is fundamentally shielded and protected by these incredibly complex, deliberately opaque systems of operational and financial secrecy?
That's a big question.
It is a powerful and, frankly, deeply unsettling thought that the perhaps inevitable end state of so much innovation is often just passive wealth protection, cleverly disguised by layers of complexity. Thank you for providing the material for this really intensive deep dive into the invisible playbooks of global power and secrecy.
My pleasure. Fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.